Hey everyone, I'm Will, and in this video we are talking about, you guessed it, the ultra wide angle lens specifically for landscape photography. When I first started out in my photography journey, I didn't even consider using an ultra wide angle lens, and through teaching I found that a lot of my clients are using a 24-70 and they either don't have an ultra wide, or if they do have one, they don't really know how to use it and make the most of it. So that's what we're going to talk about in this video, and overall why I think you should definitely have an ultra wide angle lens as part of your landscape photography kit. All these images here were shot at a focal range between 12 and 20 mil on a full frame camera. And when I refer to ultra wide, that is roughly the focal range that I'm talking about. Now, as I mentioned, when we first start out, we might generally have a 24-70, somewhere around there. And the thought of shooting wider is quite a foreign concept, because really, when you're shooting with an ultra wide, it's a completely different way of composing and a completely different way of seeing the world. In my opinion, an ultra wide angle lens is really a specialist lens. And if you're not using it properly, then you can kind of think, what the heck am I doing? Sometimes when I'm running workshops, people will be using an ultra wide, but they'll be zooming into around 24 or 35 mil, completely nullifying the whole point of actually having the ultra wide on. So let me share with you some tips on using these lenses so you can really make the most of it, because honestly, to me, this is the workhorse when it comes to landscape photography. I'd say close to 50% of my whole portfolio is shot using the ultra wide. It's a lens that either gets overly simplified with compositions, or like I said, it just gets overlooked altogether. So let's take a look. I'll talk about the lenses I'm using as well and why I use them, some of the problems with these lenses, particularly this big guy here. And hopefully by the end of the video, you really have a good understanding on how to make the most of these lenses. And if you're thinking of buying one, hopefully this video helps you pull the trigger on making that purchase. And also at the end of the video, I'll give you a list of wide angle lenses which I've personally used and can definitely recommend. So if you're thinking of buying one, stay tuned for that at the end of the video. So what is the point of the ultra wide lens? How do we use it? The powerful thing with this lens, it allows us to capture something that is pretty much based at our feet or a few inches in front of us, as well as everything out off in the distance. The real strength with this lens is that it allows us to create an incredible sense of depth if we are composing correctly. We can create that sense of depth by taking advantage of what's called the diminishing perspective, where we are seeing objects progressively begin large in our frame and get smaller as they travel off into the distance. This is a very common way to create compositions with depth by incorporating near and far subject matter, or the diminishing perspective. How do we do that with the wide angle lens? By getting close enough to our first foreground element. And when we get close, the ultra wide will partially stretch that out and it will naturally create that big to small flow. Now, if you're not doing that in your composition, if you are standing quite far back from the foreground, well, you've completely got rid of that diminishing perspective and that sense of depth. Now, everything else in that frame will be quite far away, and really we've lost that three-dimensional feel. So if you are using an ultra wide, you've got one already, or you're thinking about getting one, that is first and foremost the best way to use it. Now, when I say getting close, I'm talking about really close, within a foot of that first subject matter, pretty much. That's how I create images like these. I'm so close to that foreground. I've heightened the detail in the foreground. It's become quite large in the frame, and then very quickly anything else after that gets smaller and smaller in size. Objects of similar texture, plants, they progressively get small through the frame. Think of the classic road shot. Now we're getting that perspective where we have the big to small. That will pull the eye through the frame, and then we'll have our main subject or a main focal point somewhere off in the distance. Of course, when you're shooting with these lenses though, we have an extreme depth of field to consider. So you might be shooting at apertures around f8, f11, f16, and very common for me, I'll end up having to focus stack if I'm determined to be incredibly close to that foreground. So that is the one thing I want you to keep in mind when it comes to using these lenses. So why is that good for landscape photography? Because when you're out in nature, particularly mountainous environments or even forest scenes, seascapes, pretty much all scenarios we come across as landscape photographers, it's very common that we will have that one main subject or one main focal point which is very striking and catches our eye. But there's also many parts of the surrounding environment which are beautiful, and we want to incorporate that to build out the bigger picture of where we are and what we're taking in. It's what we kind of call the grand landscape. We don't just want to zone in on one specific subject matter, we want that one subject with the environment itself. Think of a mountain scene that I have here in Fiordland. I might like a particular mountain, but then I'm in love with the river as well as the ferns and plant life in that whole scene. This is the lens I use to allow me to put all that together in a single frame. Again, the main tip I can give you is don't be afraid of getting low, don't be afraid of getting close. Take advantage of that natural stretch we're going to get, that diminishing perspective to pull the eye through the frame. One thing to avoid with the ultra wide is big open spaces. You don't want to have too much sky. The eye will just drift up into the sky then. You don't want to have an imbalance in your frame, which can happen very easily because you're fitting so much in. You want to make sure that the frame is evenly balanced with subject matter. Everything needs to be there to help flow and guide the eye through to the background. And the background is typically where I'm putting that main subject matter. And that's how you get the depth. You're going to lead the eye from the front, subtly through to the background. Okay, which lenses am I shooting with? I'm currently, the last few years, shooting with the Sony 12 to 24mm 2.8. And I still carry with me on some occasions, and I'll explain why, the Sony 16 to 35 2.8. Now, prior to owning these, I've used and had quite a few ultra wides, and through running workshops, you name it, I've pretty much used them. I've used over a dozen ultra wide angle lenses. My main advice for you is to get an ultra wide that is at least 16 or 17mm. Now, I have the 12 to 24. Do you need to be able to go all the way to 12mm? Not really. It just depends where you live. Because I'm in these steep mountain valleys and I'm trying to incorporate near and far subject matter, I really enjoy having that extra bit of width. If you can budget for it, sure, definitely get something wider. 14 to 24, 12 to 24. I think there's even a 10 to 20 for Canon on the full frame. The wider the better, sure, why not? It just opens up a few more possibilities for you. If you can't budget for it, have a look at something like the 16 to 35 in an f4, or Tamron even does a 17 to 28, which is a pretty handy focal range as well. But really, if you can get around that 14 to 16 range, that is incredibly handy and probably where you'll end up most of the time, around 14, 15, 16, even up to 17mm. One thing I'll say about the 12 to 24mm Sony, if you are thinking about getting this, I gotta say, this thing is terrible in the rain. You would have seen me in videos. You know I go out on those rainy days. Once this thing gets wet, it is incredibly hard to dry and get the rain off the front of the lens. The water just goes round and round and round. Honestly, it drives me crazy. So for that reason, I still carry the 16 to 35 on those rainy days, only on the rainy days. I don't want to carry the two lenses around if I don't need to, two ultra wides. But this one cleans off a lot better. So when you're looking at getting an ultra wide, just keep in mind anything that has that large bulbous element on the front, the big curvature, it could struggle in the wet compared to, say, the more traditional 16 or 35. There is that curve there on the glass, but it's nowhere near as extreme. Also keep in mind, if you are someone who uses filters, I'm not, but if you have the built-in hood like what we have on the 12 to 24, it could be a bit tricky getting your filters on there. You probably need to look at a filter system that goes on the rear of the lens. Lenses that I can recommend personally, and if you're on a budget, the Tamron 17 to 28 is quite handy. Sigma 14 to 24 as well. Otherwise, the 16 to 35 in the Sony range, the 14 to 24 Nikon, Canon 15 to 30, all of those absolutely awesome. So it just comes down to your budget. Let me know below what you're using, or if you are thinking of getting an ultra wide, because I'd love to hear your thoughts and your feedback on that. It's a balancing act when it comes to the composition, and that's why I do suggest using a zoom over a prime, because it just might help you dial in that comp and remove some of those distractions and negative spaces in your frame. Alright guys, that's it for the ultra wide angle lens. Thanks for checking out this video. Hopefully that answers a few questions for you, but of course if you have any, leave them below and I'll get back to you. Thanks.